Well, policy can certainly not be forever, and oftentimes is not. And you can almost across the board, you can find examples in the resource world where we've changed our attitude and tried to change our policy. And it's not always, people don't necessarily shift with us. And that's not always all bad, because we're shifting policy, and that may have some negative effects. I'm trying. My mind is racing here to think of some good examples where policy is never forever. And fire comes up right away. I mean, it wasn't until the 60s that it was, and maybe even into the early 70s, that the role of fire was looked upon with favor in the pristine forests. And all forests are not the same. Some places it's easier to embrace the presence of fire than it is in others, but the Park Service had some really strong policies about fire control, and especially as we started to flirt with the ideas of introducing fire artificially to accomplish resource objectives, sort of thing. And I can remember a fire ecologist who was working in Washington that was told by his superior, who was up pretty high in our business, that the idea of reintroducing fire into parks will be done over my dead body. Well, that's a pretty strong statement for someone that's working their way up through, because he was advocating fire, and I was involved in this. It happened to be I was a young resource manager at the time, and trying to convince a staff that was locked into fire control, period, including our early director, Horace Albright, who was an icon, but he didn't like fire. A lot of people didn't like fire. And so it was a hard go to change attitudes on fire policy, much less what we're doing now. And so there's a good example of policy changes. Now, earlier in the history of the national parks, predator control was very much in, and in the 20s, the wolves were basically eliminated from Yellowstone, and all predators. There were good animals and bad animals, but as oftentimes happens, voices from the outside, academics and others, were rattling the cage, so to speak, that this is crazy. You folks are telling everybody that national parks are places where nature takes its course, so on. Well, that was just rhetoric. It had nothing to do with what was happening. And that was a major policy change when we instituted the program of stopping predator control, including coyotes, including anything that bit other animals. And so we had good animals and bad animals, and the policy, it took a long time for that policy to get institutionalized.